In this section, we're going to take our final Maven project, which is able to build a jar, unit test it, implement code coverage metrics, and also include PMD static code analysis, and then publish it to a Maven repository, and run it on Jenkins as a freestyle job. To start with, because we're having to use credentials to do the actual publishing, we're going to have to create a credential in Jenkins, much like we did for Git itself. To do that, go to Manage Jenkins, Manage Credentials, System, Global, then you're going to say Add Credentials. In this case, it's a username and password style credential, so we're going to enter it in here along with the descriptive ID. I've already done this, which you can see as GitHub Publish Maven. Another important aspect is that Jenkins by default doesn't have Maven installed. So in order for the command mvn to have meaning, you're going to have to set it up. You do that by going to Manage Jenkins, Global Tool Configuration, Maven Installations, where you're going to want to add a Maven installation. In this case, when you hit Add Maven, you give it a name, and then you'll choose the option to install automatically. In this case, I'm choosing the latest version 3.8.6 from Apache. Now we're going to create our actual job. New item, give it a name. Select Freestyle Project. The first thing we're going to have to do is give it the location of our repository. You can get that by going to the location of the repository, SSH, copy, pasting it in, selecting your Git credential, which will have the error message go away. Remembering that the specification is for main instead of master, so you'll have to change that. This will cause the source code location to get checked out or cloned when it's run. Additionally, from a CI perspective, the idea is that anytime that code base is changed, you automatically want to run this build. You have two basic options: polling SCM, where it's gonna detect changes at some interval you'll give it on a schedule. However, this can be very process intensive if you're running lots of different jobs. So the recommendation is to use what's known as a GitHub hook. This is something, though, that you have to set up on the GitHub side, where you're going to have GitHub reach out and actually hit Jenkins whenever a change is made. For now, we're going to skip this. Because we have a secret, in this case, a secret used for doing the Maven publishing, for the build environment, we're going to have to specify the name of that secret. In this case, we have a username and password. We'll have it be separated. And then we have to give it the names of the variables. So we'll call the username Maven username, password, mvn password. And it's already been selected here. This is important because it's going to insert into our environment two environment variables, mvm username and mvm password. So we're going to be able to pass them into the command line in terms of publishing. When it comes to the build step, we're going to use the Invoke top-level Maven targets option. We're going to select the version of Maven we set up earlier, and for our goals, we're going to say clean and then deploy. Remember, though, that when we did this locally, we had to pass in several parameters at the command line to do the publishing. In this case, the name of the repository that's in our settings XML file, along with the username and password and the revision number. So in this case, remember that the Maven publish credentials come from a credential binding. We bound the username to mvm username and the password to mvn password. So we're going to pass in these as environment variables. Finally, we're going to use a special Jenkins environment variable known as build number to represent part of the revision. So on the first build, it'll be 1.1. On the second, it'll be 1.2. And for this to happen, we have to select the option to inject build variables. Finally, we have the settings XML file. Remember that locally we had to make a settings XML file with the distribution information in it. So what I've done, though, is I've taken that same information, put it in the repository itself so that we could use the option to have the settings file be on the file system and pass it in directly. This is how we'll handle doing settings project specific in terms of this build. Then we can save it and run the build. You can click on the bar to get the output. And it worked. When we look at the job page, you're going to see that the build has finally been successful. But if we go to the repository and look at packages, we will see that it's been uploaded. In this case, it was our third build, so the version was 1.3. What about our PMD and unit test and code coverage reports, though? How do I get them to show up on the job page? Consider that the unit testing reporting is going to be a part of Jenkins itself. However, Jacoco code coverage and PMD are going to require the usage of plugins. The way you do this is by going to Manage Jenkins, Manage Plugins. In my case, I already have them installed. But in the case of Jacoco, you want to install the Jacoco plugin. In the case of the PMD warnings, you want what's known as the Warnings Next Generation plugin, which will also install. Once installed, we'll configure the job and go to the very bottom. In this case, we're going to add some post-build actions to deal with the reporting. We'll start with publishing JUnit. We're going to publish JUnit test results, and that's where we have to give it the file path of where our reports have been generated. If you remember from our directory structure, they're under Target, Surefire Reports, and we'll just pull in whatever the XML files are. We don't need to worry about any of the other settings. For Jacoco, you select Record Jacoco Coverage Report. This will populate with default settings we don't need to change. The way it works is it'll pick up this .exec file that's generated behind the scenes. Finally, for PMD, we're going to record compiler warning and static analysis results. We're then going to have to select our tool, which is PMD, and then give it the location of our report. In this case, target pmd.xml. Now we can run again. You now see a bunch of additional output showing PMD, Jacoco, and test. If you look at our job page though, we're going to have some new options. A coverage trend, PMD warnings, and some charts. If we look at the coverage trend, we can drill down, just like we did locally, into the individual code. So we can see that our main method isn't tested, while our add method is. For the PMD warnings, it will take you to a report that shows the 11 known issues, where you can then drill down into each one of them. In this case, it'll take you to the line of code level, showing you what the exact error is, along with the recommendation. We additionally can see that this was our fourth build, so we had a fourth version uploaded to our repository.